is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the William Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. It's important to acknowledge that this land, its water and living beings have been cared for thousands of years by these many Indigenous peoples. We meet here tonight to learn how all of us here can be advocates for the protection of this land today. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest speaker, Joe Mihevc. He was a city councillor for 27 years, has extensive expertise on the ins and outs of City Hall. And during his time as councillor, he was valued by his constituents as always being actively involved with the community. He has a wealth of knowledge about political engagement, so we're so excited to have him here with us tonight. Take it away, Joe.
Well, thank you very, very much, Emily, and good evening to everyone. I'm recognizing a number of the faces and names here, and so I feel that I am with friends. So the topic of the evening is really how to work with elected officials, and of course, I have a little bit of a bias in that my strength is actually working on the civic level. And maybe there's another session at some point working with provincial and federal folks. But I'm going to start with two stories just to emphasize how desperately important it is to work with, understand, advocate with the city councilors. One is the pesticide. One is a winning story and one is a losing story. The first story, let's start with the winning story. 2003 to 2006, David Miller is the mayor. And he's going to allow a free vote on a possible pesticide ban for people's front lawns, grassy areas in their backyards, and so on. And it's a heck of a fight. The pesticide industry, working with the lawn care industry, and that includes all those high school, university kids that cut grass and tend to lawns and front yards and so on, came together to say, no, we really need these products. They are really, really important to the health and beauty of Toronto and so on. Okay, so on the number of people that wanted, the organizations that wanted a pesticide ban, that included environmentalists and largely public health people. And it was a rock'em sock'em debate. And we knew both at the Board of Health level, and as the issue made its way through committee and up to council, that the vote was going to be very close. In fact, at the end of the day, we won that vote by one vote. 45 members of council, that vote was won 23 to 22. And it was by the strength of the Toronto Environmental Alliance. And the funniest piece of that was that there was one councillor who said, I'm going to vote according to the majority of people that I get contacted by in my ward. And so we, Toronto Environmental Alliance, I remember it was Katrina Miller, rushed out to this person's ward in Scarborough into a busy plaza and started collecting signatures so that she could rush back to City Hall, get back before afternoon to make sure that the vote was secure. And we won that person's vote. That's how tight it was, but we won it. So fast forward, the year is 2015, and the big debate is the taking down or not to take down the Gardiner Expressway. And there we had, call it the Canadian Automobile Association and types, who were advocating that it be repaired, even though the cost was literally $1 billion+, and now it's actually over $2 billion, but that's another matter. And on our side, call it the urbanist, we need to figure out different patterns of mobility. We can't be so car dependent for all kinds of reasons, including sustainability reasons and environmental reasons. And the mayor was on the other side of the issue, We had a group of us on this side of the issue, and including some developers who had interests, land holdings there, and they knew that if it was by an expressway, that the value of their properties would be worth a lot less. So together we formed a little alliance. It was a rock'em sock'em fight, and we lost that one. And we're suffering the consequences even up to today. We lost that one by 2 votes, 2 votes for a multi-billion-dollar expenditure. That's how close it was. There are a number of votes on city council that are that close. It is never easy when they are, especially if they are game-changing types of issues where the vote is not particularly close. So here's some points that I've kind of learned along the way with environmental sustainability, urban sustainability types of issues. First point is every vote counts. If there's going to be a change, especially a pretty good policy change, the reason why it hasn't changed up to now is because vested interests have made sure that it is not going to change. And so to actually have a change in the way City Hall deals with a big issue, every vote will count. The other thing that I've learned is that, you know, it's not like there's a vote on City Council that says, let's be more environmentally friendly, and then you kind of win it, and then nirvana is around the corner. Winning sustainability, urban sustainability, is a product of about 100 votes that happen every term. And we're going to win some, and we're going to lose some. And it's all about the conflict and the configuration of the forces on one side and the other side. So we're going to win some, we're going to lose some. Vested interests will balk at making change. And just think of the different issues that, you know, you've seen in the newspapers and in the media in the last little while. It's cycling issues, green building standards, retrofits, financial and organizational support for environmental organizations like Green Neighbors, purchasing city vehicles that are greener or that don't use fossil fuels, or the TTC making a policy choice to do all its fleet with battery-powered vehicles. All those votes at the end of the day become tight votes for one reason or another. So here's some tips that that I have found that are really helpful to you as you go to see elected officials. And here's the one caveat, is that I'm speaking really from a municipal perspective. At the provincial and federal level, it's a whole different ballgame, and that's because they are so top heavy. If I were to say what's the trend in the last 20, 30 years, it has been that there's a sucking sound in the premier's office and in the prime minister's office. And sometimes I feel it's hardly worth, unless they're a cabinet minister and have a seat at the table, hardly worth talking to MPs because they get whipped and you can predict their vote. You just have to look at what the party leader is saying. So that's a different kettle of fish, and that is work that needs to happen on a national level or a federal level, that is, multinational level, to get those votes in order. But for the local level, one of the first things to remember is each person is their own political party. Yes, the mayor has a lot of power and can whip some votes, and has, especially these days with the strong mayor powers, has additional powers to whip a vote. But at the end of the day, each city councilor is their own political party, and therefore they are influenceable. So here are 6 tips that I think I have found helpful, or I have found work when you see someone change their mind or have a good environmental position. What are the kinds of things that came to play with them? One is relationship building. It is, you have less chance of success if you are coming in at the last stage, 1 week before the vote on pesticides, and you're trying to get their support. It is way better to come much earlier. As soon as you know that the issue is an important one and it's coming down the pipe, and it's not 1 week away, not even a month away, but is 6 months away or a year away, to start that relationship building. And just think of it, if I want to influence any one of you, I'm a good friend of Paul Antze's. I know that if Paul Antze comes to see me, I'm going to do what he says, or I'm going to be more prone to do what he says. Why? Because we have a relationship of trust and shared values, and that relationship is a base for actually then him having an influence on me as a city councilor. So even before you do the specific ask, I say build a relationship with the councilor, and yes, the MP and the MP in your area. Another related to that, I think a second thing that is really important is to find people that are close to the councilor. So people that worked on their election campaign, people that donated to them, people that are their friends and families, and of course, especially at the city council level, the vast majority of councilors live in the area that they represent. And so finding that network and making them, or finding folks that could be part of the advocacy team, really will make a difference in that approach. Because some folks will come when will change their mind or advocate even more strongly if they know that their friends and dear supporters are with them. The third point is to, as I said before, is to start early. Not even the deputations that are made at city council. Sometimes I think, wow, what a waste of time. It's so late. The goose is already 80% cooked by the time it reaches the floor of council and by the time it hits the media. The most successful campaigns are grounded in much earlier work that happens 1 year, even 2 years before the issue actually hits the floor of council. A fourth thing that I would suggest is that you need to understand the pressures and the perspective of a particular councilor. So some folks are very, call it fiscally minded or financially conservative, and you will want to make your pitch based on the perspective that they bring. Some hate all development, some are okay with development, some are cyclists, some are solid environmentalists, some are concerned about not raising taxes. Some have connections with the mayor, some don't have connections with the mayor. So you want to get a profile of a particular councilor so that you don't go in and basically put your foot in it in the wrong kind of way. You understand where they're coming from, what their sensitivities are, and you make the pitch based on that knowledge. A fifth thing that I think is really important, and maybe I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but with so much anger in the air and intolerance of one another that is part of, I guess, our new COVID-related psyche, is do not play to embarrass folks. This is not about you expressing your anger. You play to win. Your job is just to get their vote. It is not to make them your ideological brother or sister. It is to get their vote on a particular issue, remembering that there's going to be a lot of issues. And on this issue, you want to summon all the arguments and perspectives that will help them feel good in their heart and the way they put their consciousness and their ideology together, that they are making the right choice. If you're there to basically kind of do the finger wagging or to embarrass them or to kind of rant away, then frankly, we're not going to win. And these days, I think it is very important for us to win as environmentalists rather than to be noble losers. And the last thing that I would say is really, really important is when you, and it would be great to have some, citywide campaigns where we're all kind of pushing in the same direction, is coalitions matter. So when I go back to the two stories that I mentioned before, the pesticide debate, You know how we won that one? Because we also built a coalition between the environmental people and the people that were concerned about public health. So the doctors and the nurses and their associations and so on, and also people who were who had pets, because their animals were also dying and getting cancer because of pesticides on lawns. So the stronger your coalition is in the way you're able to bring different parties in from slightly different perspectives, the stronger your coalition is. We almost won that Gardiner debate because we had, frankly, some key players in the development industry was saying, no, the new urbanism, Mr. Mayor, the new urbanism is not to build expressways on pedestals. It is to bring them down to grade, save that money, and use that money invested in cycling and public transit. We came this close to it, because we had a coalition with developers who were anxious to win the issue as well. So coalitions really, really matter. If you put together a good coalition, you have a very, very good shot, and you can approach the councillor from different perspectives. So those are 6 tips that I would give you to basically approach city councillors, and nuance that a little bit, and you can use that same approach for MPPs and for MPs. So those are my comments, and I'll pass the floor back to you, Emily. I think I'm on time.
Thanks, Joe. Actually, next we're going to have GNN volunteer Jessica Carradine.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Joe. That was a great way to hear some examples of the importance of this work and some insights on how to do it well. I'll introduce myself quickly. As Emily said, I'm Jessica. I am a lifelong Torontonian. I am from the Eglinton Lawrence ward, and I'm a member of GNN's Green Advocacy team. I have some background experience with engaging with elected officials, but I'm really interested in learning from others on how to do it well and what their experiences have been. Now, connecting with our elected officials is clearly so important, but how much actually happens and why is there not more? It seems that the majority of Canadians report being concerned about climate change, but that politicians still seem to think that their constituents don't really care. They aren't hearing about environmental issues when they're canvassing or in their outreach efforts. In contrast, politicians are hearing from other powerful groups. There's a lot of lobbying from the oil and gas industry, private real estate developers, and others who have their own agenda. So why is it that what we as Canadians care about is not getting through? Maybe it's because the means we are using aren't effective. For example, demonstrations are a great way of showing concern, but they're also anonymous, so politicians don't know if their constituents attend. Petitions and letters are also a great way to get your message across, but they're fleeting, and sometimes it's not clear to politicians how serious people are who sign when all they have to do is vote. These aren't bad options, but they're just a bit limited. When there is evidence that personal connections with politicians is very effective. Joe has given us clear examples of this, but it can be daunting, and sometimes there are obstacles to connecting with politicians. For example, we can all have our own personal doubts about where to begin, being afraid of not being taken seriously, and having limited background knowledge about an issue. And there can also be more objective barriers as well, such as politicians just having busy schedules, and sometimes staffers' efforts to sort of intercede and pass comments along when they won't really make it through. So at GNN, we started asking ourselves, is there a solution to help us overcome these obstacles and bring people together to make it less daunting? I'm now going to pass it over to Paul to talk about our new project.
Thank you. And I think I'm unmuted now. So thanks very much, Jessica. I think you've set the stage well for what I'd like to say. I'm Paul Antze. I'm currently Senior Advisor of Green Neighbors Network and a member of the core team for our Green Advocates project. So Jessica just described some of the obstacles that make it so daunting to engage with our elected officials. On the one side, these personal doubts and limitations, and then on the other, some real barriers that are there in the way the offices of politicians to create barriers and protect the time of the politician. So she asked if there's a way to overcome these obstacles. We think that the answer is a tentative yes. There might be, not just in one or two places, in fact, but in ridings all across the city. Why do I say tentative? Because so far as I know, nobody's tried something exactly like this up to now. So it's kind of an experiment. Our name for the experiment is the Green Advocates Project. Now, our project starts from a very basic observation about organizations that have made successful use of meetings with politicians. Their experience shows that at a bare minimum, you need two things. First, you need a group of motivated volunteers living in your riding who share your concerns and are ready to get active. Now, of course, that just being able to have such a group can be a major advantage. And this is something that Joe has pointed out to us in discussions as well. At the very least, you're going to be taken more seriously and you're going to find it easier to get a meeting because there's a group of you. So obviously, there's more than one person who seems to care about this. And then on the more subjective side, there's a lot of strength and confidence that comes from being there in numbers with everyone playing a role. So good, there's the group. Now, I said there was going to be another requirement as well. And that is that besides just having a group, you need to be well prepared, which means you need to do some planning. In particular, you'll want to be really clear about the issue you're bringing to your elected representative and the change you want to see. You also want to do some careful strategizing about before going into any meeting so you can keep the discussion focused and get productive results. That means being really clear about your short-term aims in the meeting, but also about longer-term goals as well. And I want to come back to that point in a minute. And it's one really that echoes some points that Joe was making. So you need a group that lives in your riding. You need to do all this planning. It still sounds like a fairly tall order. Or maybe not so tall. Our Green Advocates Project is based on the idea that by leveraging and sharing what we know and what we're learning, we can make both of these tasks quite a lot easier for everyone. So let's start with the first challenge, finding that group of motivated volunteers in your own riding. I'm guessing that many of you here in our audience are members of Green Neighbors Network. If so, you may recall that when you signed up with us, we asked you some questions about your interests. What would you like to do with GNN? One of the options we gave you was political engagement. Over time, we accumulated quite a list of people who ticked that box, more than 160 when I last looked. Then we used postal codes to sort out the list by riding and ward. And lo and behold, we discovered that we had groups of GNN members interested in political engagement in every single ward in the city. So that's the key to our project. Now, you live in Toronto, in a Toronto ward or riding? Are you interested in a grassroots environmental politics? Well, we have a group of people in your ward who share that interest. What we're hoping to do is to bring you and that group together and give you the tools that you'll need to succeed. So let's talk about those tools. That takes us back to the planning side of our challenges. Even when you have a group, you'll need to meet, get organized, and make some decisions. Since these are exactly the tasks that we will face every new Green Advocates group, we on the core team have been working on ways to simplify and streamline them. The first of these involves some direct support for new local groups to help them get underway. A pair of our core team members will contact everyone on the list in a given riding, inviting them to attend a virtual meeting to launch a local Green Advocates group. That's the entry. Using a set of guidelines that we've drafted, They'll lead the group through a few basic steps that will help members get organized to the point where they can begin making their own decisions. The 2 core members will stay involved for the first few meetings, but we hope and expect that group members will gradually assume leadership after that. For obvious reasons, our core team can't launch local teams across the city all at once. In fact, we plan to start slowly with a series of pilot launches and our own individual writings to test drive our model and see how it works. Once you've had a good dose of that firsthand experience and maybe learned a few lessons as well, we hope to scale up our model still slowly until we really do have green advocates in every riding. During this period, we'll also be testing and refining a package of resources that we'll share with local groups to help make their life easier over the longer term as well. These include guidelines for meetings, scripts for initial phone calls and letters, and detailed strategic advice for meetings with politicians. We'll also provide some very basic help with the tough task of choosing an issue and clarifying what the group wants to change and the asks it will bring to its meetings with a politician. We've cheated a little bit. We started from the assumption that many of our local groups will share a common set of concerns. We're betting that a lot of these will center on recent measures taken by the provincial government, notably Bill 23, which creates new housing developments in the Green Belt, severely weakens the power of the province's regional conservation authorities, and also weakens environmental protections for wetlands. For groups that want to pursue this issue, we've prepared a set of briefing notes and a package of additional resources on the subject that should make it a lot simpler to identify goals and asks for meetings. Over time, we hope to provide more of these packages and briefing notes on other prominent issues of concern. Now, up to now, I've been giving you a very compact, nuts and bolts summary of our Green Advocates plan. Before concluding, however, I want to say a few words about 2 more general ideas that have informed our thinking about this project. They both relate to my earlier phrase about detailed strategic advice for meetings with politicians. Actually, that phrase may be a little misleading. We'll be providing detailed advice on drawing on some of the best ideas pioneered by other organizations like Citizens Climate Lobby. But in doing so, we also want to encourage our groups to think carefully about what success means in this context and what forms it can take. It may help to think of success in our meetings with politicians as actually taking 2 different forms, operating at different levels and in different time frames. The first kind of success is the kind most of us think of when planning to meet with a politician. It's something that happens right there in the room if you go in with clear goals and a well-defined ask and some compelling arguments. Usually takes the form of a yes, or at least let me think about it and get back to you in response to your request. You go home saying, well, I think that was a win. And you would certainly be right. The other kind of success is less obvious at first. It takes place over a series of meetings. It comes from listening thoughtfully and speaking in ways that are likely to be heard and considered. For example, speaking from personal experience and responding to the personal experiences that you might get from your politician in discussion. Here, the aim is not so much to have a debate with your politician as to have a real conversation. And actually getting to a real conversation is not so easy, and it's a real achievement. Over time, such conversations may not bring a dramatic change in your politician's views, but they may bring something almost as good, an ongoing relationship and a new respect for you and others who hold views like yours. And this is very much, Joe, echoing the point that you were just making about the way in which relationships add to the influence and impact of the opinions of someone you know. They're grounded in the relationship and your knowledge of that person. So this is a side as well to the process of engaging our politicians. And it may be one that is not as obvious right away, but has a lot of impact if you stick around over the longer term. So bottom line, our strategic advice, so-called, is not to avoid the shallow gains of the fleeting win in order to build a positive relationship with your politician, although clearly we think that's a great idea, but rather to aim for both kinds of success, short-term and long-term, whenever you can in your meetings, ideally without letting either undermine the other. You don't want your desire to build your relationship with the politician to completely stop you from bringing in the critical points that you want to make and the asks that are your reasons for being there. On the other hand, you get caught up with driving the point home and you may alienate the person you're talking to and lose the possibility of that productive relationship. So it's a bit of a dance and you have to balance the two against each other. Now, my final point is also about that so-called strategic advice and all the other advice and plans and guidelines I've been describing here. I'm worried that I've probably given you a very misleading impression. A, that I know what I'm talking about, and B, that we on the core team have some special source of knowledge about how to create a successful Green Advocates group. The truth is that we don't know enough to advise anyone about this, at least not with much confidence. The best we can claim is that we've done some research and we've looked at the experience of others. Based on that, we think that this is something that just might work. But we don't know, and we won't until we convene our first groups and activate a final magical and hitherto unmentioned ingredient of our plan. We'll need to hear from our participants, not just occasionally, but all the time. And in fact, they'll need to hear from each other. That's the only way we'll know what's working and how to harvest the best ideas for making it better. We'll very likely need some kind of digital networking app to facilitate this, Slack or WhatsApp or something like that. But the idea would be to come to the point where instead of having some of us being the ones who launch the project and others being the participants, that we all become co-investigators in this big experiment we're doing together, and that we'd all be learning from it. Or to use another phrase, we'd all be fellow members of a single community of practice, sharing what we learn about the best ways to engage in grassroots political action. Now, that does sound a little far-fetched, perhaps even magical, but who knows? We haven't tried it, but it just might work. Thanks. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you, Paul. And if you are excited by this project as we all are and are thinking, where do I sign up? We will share the form in the chat just now. And this form will just ask you a few quick questions about what riding you're from. And we'll also ask for your email. And we'll be, if you don't want to fill out the form right now, no problem. We'll be sending a follow-up email that also has this form. And yeah, so we have a bit of time for the Q&A now. And we will get started with a question for Joe. And this question comes from Liz. And it's how to get the info about the counselor. How to get info about your counselor. Just sign up for their newsletter, or what else can you do to learn more about your counselor?
Well, I think there usually are people in your neighborhood that know the counselor. That's why he or she got elected. So I think that's really important. Yes, I think the newsletters offer an insight, but usually they're cell newsletters. They are about things happening in the ward, and you might not gain a deeper insight into a particular counselor. So I would say trying to find out who they are, where they hang out, who their friends are, and be part of that circle, that's kind of small p neighborhood political circle that knows who he or she is. And then you find out whether they got kids, what their concerns are, how they think through issues, and you can develop a pretty good profile of their ideology, their psychology, and their pathology, I guess. Yeah, so it is a bit of a task, and I would say that's one of the first tasks. And maybe as well, and that goes back to the first point that I made, is go and build a relationship with them. You know, if they're doing a parks cleanup or hosting an event in the ward, go out and meet with them and start by just developing a good old relationship. And we know in human everyday living, and at the end of the day, of course, sometimes we elevate politicians to a certain level that perhaps is inappropriate. They're human beings just like everyone else, trying to figure stuff out. And so, you know, having that relationship, having good, positive, healthy relationships is the best way to influence them. And then also for you to understand where they're coming from.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Christy that is also for you, Joe, I believe. Please suggest how residents in areas represented by a solid environmentalist like Gord Perks in Parkdale High Park can support campaigns in other districts where councillors are not so committed. It's hard to appear legitimate if one's own address is outside their ward.
Well, if you live in an area where there is a solid environmental sustainability counselor, that's a blessing, and those are your partners that can do can help you do solid strategic thinking. So if you had a Gord Perks or say a Mike Layton, who was previously one of the champions on city council, that's where you can say, okay, you can work with them and figure out what the big issues are. You can work with them to say, okay, what's coming before council, forecasting 3 months out, 6 months out, 1 year out, and what are the best intervention points? And then out of that, especially if you're working on a multi-ward level, you can develop a campaign to basically win an issue. That's what you get with if you have a councillor champion on your side. You don't have to convince them. You're on the same team, and they're playing the inside game while you're playing the outside game.
Thank you. Very interesting. It's very strategic. We have another question for you, Joe. You're very popular. Given the enormous workload on a smaller city councillor, how long should we expect to wait for a response to yet another request of the councillor?
How long to wait for a response from a councillor?
Yeah, just about like, what is the time frame that you should expect, I think is the question.
Well, if you go to toronto.ca, you will find, and just hunt around on that website, you'll find not only the councillor and his or her email address, but also their senior staff. And so what I would do is start with an email, send it to the councillor, but send it to the staff person. Now, city councillors have 7 or 8 staff because their wards are so big. One of them's job is to be the scheduler, and they take all the invitations together and present them to the councillor, maybe prioritize them themselves. And you want to know who that scheduler is. You also want to know who the EA, executive assistant, is, because sometimes it's easier to get a meeting with the executive assistant than it is with the councillor, or it starts with the executive assistant and then it goes to the councillor. But I would just email them all, email them all and say, we want this meeting. And one of them will pick up on it and get back to you.
Great. We have a question about the free vote that you mentioned, Joe, about the pesticide ban in the early 2000s. Are not all votes free? What does that mean?
Yeah, a free vote means the mayor's not going to harass the hell out of you. So mayors are mayors, and they feel that they have the responsibility for the whole city. And all mayors try to use the tools that, to put this positively or value neutrally, all mayors try to fashion the city according to their perceived interest and sense of what Toronto needs. And Mel did it, David Miller did it, and he was my friend. We worked very closely together. Rob Ford did it, and John Tory did it. Some do it more aggressively than others, and some of the tools that they have is chairs of committees, appointments, especially some appointments that then allow you to travel and or to be in the media more. So those are the sometimes we jokingly call it candy. That's the candy that they can give out. And if you want something in your ward and you want to get it through during the budget time, then cooperation with the mayor's office always helps. But that sometimes is not possible because you are basically on a different wavelength than the mayor. And that's where you have to, as an elected person, you have to figure out, do I go with my principles? And yes, the answer is always go with your principles. But sometimes you might say, okay, I can't go there, but I can go here, but I need support over here. And that's where politics and sausage making have a lot in common. So votes are never forced. They are forced at the provincial and federal level, not at the local level. But yes, the mayor's office has a lot of power to help you to see the light, which is their light.
Cool. I have a question from Carolyn, which is sort of a suggestion. I would like to see a ban of election signs, either on private and public property, or at least public property. I wrote Gord Perks because I don't think my counselor would support this idea. What else can I do?
Well, I think that's a big issue, and I think you would want to probably find 10 people who maybe think the same way first, and just see how much support. I think that might be in my years on City Hall, I don't think I've heard tell of too many people disgruntled over lawn signs. I think it's just part of politics. I don't think that's a winning issue as much as you may feel it strongly in your own heart. I think that all good politics starts with the good idea. If you're the only one that has that good idea, it's probably not a good idea. If you find 10 people that have that good idea, then that's the beginning of a social movement. And then that's how you win. I would maybe also add that maybe you won't win that one, but maybe you win an issue that says something like a deposit return system. If you bring your used signs to the recycling depot, that you get some of your deposit, or you get a certain percentage of your deposit back, just so that at least people do it in an environmentally conscious way.
Great. And we also have some comments on that issue. Brampton has already banned election signs everywhere. There are lots of people disgruntled over lawn signs. And a note on the recycling. You can bring them to one of the environmental drop-off centers where you can bring batteries, electronics, paint. And
let me say this, let me add this. The people who want to ban election signs are usually incumbents. New people on the block who want to get their name out there usually are the ones that want election signs. So there's a democracy sustainability interface kind of issue.
Okay. Now something a little bit different. We just got a question from Stephen. What are some of and I think that this will be directed at Paul. What are some of the initiatives that the Green advocates will be encouraged to push for? And will the program be a top-down approach, like giving recommended campaigns, or a dispersed approach where individuals in the Green advocate groups think about and push their own initiatives?
Okay, that's a great question. What I would say is that as far as the project itself is concerned, as far as our plan is concerned, we see the local groups as being independent and just responsible to their own members and able to set their own priorities and pursue their own issues. We also think that it's helpful if a bunch of groups have a common interest to work together and perhaps press for the same things because they're more likely to have some impact. So looking for the issues that are likely to be of greatest concern, specifically issues with an environmental side to them at least, and then supporting work on those issues by providing some of the materials and resources that will make that easier that seems to me that's part of our mandate, and that's actually what we've started to do. But we're definitely not working from a model in which we come up with a series of key issues or key asks that our local groups should pursue, because that's up to them.
Great. I have a question for Joe again. I'm wondering how the strong mayor powers and their third minority majority veto affects green initiatives, and how can we reverse the strong mayor system?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. And I would note that there's an election happening at the end of June. And I would ask each and every candidate whether they would honor a non-strong mayor system. In other words, that they would, as a candidate, promise never to use that power and to advocate to any new provincial government that that power be withdrawn. One of the things about democracy is that I have my perspective, you have your perspective, and together we build the truth and we build how we're going to build our Toronto community. It's that democratic process that we want and that a strong mayor system mitigates against. That's my perspective. If the strong mayor system continues, then obviously politics has to change accordingly. And what it means is that depending on who the mayor is and how often he or she will want to use that power, also then defines your lobbyist advocacy strategy. You will have to put a lot more energy into changing or supporting the mayor in a particular position than you would have before. And that's one of the problems is that, you know, one person then or one person in their office, and usually it's someone who maybe has a little bit of political experience, and the mayor has a staff of 20 people. You have to talk to them about this issue, and then they kind of brief the mayor, and they're the most powerful person on that particular issue in the city. It's not a good system, but if it becomes the system, then you will want to know who in the mayor's office is looking at sustainability issues, develop a strong relationship with them, and try to bring issues forward to that person. And maybe rather than a 50-50 split, it would be a 60-70% split towards the mayor or the mayor's staff that is working on that issue.
Okay, so it looks like we've reached the end of our questions. We might have time for one more if anyone is furiously typing in the chat trying to get in one last question. I'll give you a moment to do that. In the meantime, we're going to put the link to our Green Advocates form in the chat once again. And I just want to reiterate that this will be in a follow-up email. Also in that follow-up email, we'll be sending you the recording. And it looks like we have one more question towards Paul. Do you have to register as a lobbyist?
No. Is the answer?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, no.
The issue is pecuniary. If you have a money interest, so if Paul is lobbying because he's promoting the public interest, that's one thing. If he's lobbying or advocating because he is representing a client, then that's another thing. That's formal lobbying. And formal lobbying is legal, it's provided for, you have to register and so on. But a public interest group that's not paid, so if you were lobbying the same issue and Emily, you were paid to do it and Paul was not paid to do it, then you would have to register, Emily, but Paul would not have to register.
Okay, very interesting.
It's good to remember that advocacy is really an essential element of the democratic process. So like the last thing that you would want is a system where it just becomes much harder to be an advocate of any kind because all sorts of bureaucratic barriers are in the way. So I don't think it's meant to discourage that, but it is meant to keep track of where the money is and who is using it in order to get the ear of influential people.
Great. So I think we are going to wrap up for tonight then. I just want to extend a huge thank you to our speakers, Joe, Jessica, and Paul. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We are looking forward to seeing you again, possibly in a Green Advocates group. And I just want to say that if you're interested in more events like this and are not a member of Green Neighbors Network, we invite you to sign up to join Green Neighbors Network. And if you do, you'll receive our monthly newsletter, be more informed of events like this in Toronto. And would any of our speakers like to have a last word?
Well, I'll just say this, there's a great quote by Margaret Mead that, sometimes I show students in this course that I teach at York University. And it is this, and I think it's so apropos to the Green Neighbors Network. And that is, never doubt the ability of a small group of people to make change happen. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has made change happen in this crazy world of ours. So, Toronto needs you, especially now. There's so much good work to be done on the sustainability file. Everything from the vehicles and the mobility patterns of Torontonians to the homes that we have and build and need to renovate. All those issues really, really matter now. And as has often been written, David Miller, for example, just wrote a book. Cities are one of the key drivers of the lack of sustainability and have the potential to be in the forefront of sustainability. So what you're doing, what you're about is really, really important for the health of our city.
Well, all I can say as a last word is, hear, hear. That's very well said, Joe, and a very inspiring note on which to conclude our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Have a
Cheers.
great
Thanks, Emily.
night. Thank you.
Good night, all. Bye-bye.